conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. A Kentuckian is selected as the RNC co-chair, Casey Crosby, a little national level news. Students file a lawsuit against the state of Kentucky for failing to provide them adequate education. We'll dig into that. Additionally, we'll dig into a few more House bills that have been filed, including bills to undo Beshear's executive order on banning conversion therapy, 10 commandments in the classroom, raising the minimum wage, and hate crimes. So we'll dig into that and so much more here today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If you could, though, take a moment to make sure, if you're watching this on the social medias anywhere, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you're watching this on the TV, listening to this on the radio, you can head over to theandrewshow.com to see all the places where you can catch and listen to the daily shows that come out through the week, more than just this one show a week. Of course, if you're trying to stay up to date on everything that's going on, obviously an important thing to do as we are now into the Kentucky legislative session. They won't be meeting again till the beginning of February, but we have been digging through bills all this past week and will continue to into this next week, so that way you know exactly what kind of legislation's on the table. Maybe there's something you care about that's being proposed you want to weigh in on. Maybe there's something that you think is important that you want to encourage your representative to pass, or maybe there's something that you think is particularly harmful that you want to make sure your representative knows to not vote for. Well, you're going to catch all that information here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. So as I mentioned, a Kentuckian, actually a former Lexington City Councilwoman named Casey Crosby, has been elected as the new co-chair of the Republican National Committee, RNC. She has been a committee woman for Kentucky, one of the three national representatives for the GOP here. And also she was the RNC treasurer during the Trump campaign and did do a lot of great things as far as that goes, with new money coming into the party, being able to put those resources out in a way that makes sense. I mean, obviously, Republicans held on to the majority in the House. They now have a majority in the Senate. And of course, Donald Trump won election. So that does point to somebody getting it right. And I certainly think Casey Crosby deserves some of that credit for the way the RNC responded. Now, I've gone over who Casey Crosby was in a prior shows that you can tune into, or is, not was, but is, and kind of some of the local, I guess you would say, lore and feelings about her. But my general thoughts overall is that she's a pretty solid individual. Anybody who's been in the party for a long length of time is going to obviously collect enemies. And as I've mentioned a few times on the show, I do not envy the hard work that chairs in maybe more moderate to blue counties have to do, or the work that you have to do when you're leading a coalition of individuals right now in the Republican Party. Because the fact of the matter is that you do have right now a cadre of people at kind of the higher echelons, I guess you'd say, the donor class, the big money movers, the people who can bring in the dollar bills for the party, that are at odds on many of the stated goals of the rank and file Republican voter. And so being able to straddle that and figure out how do you give and deliver the successes that the rank and file Republican voter is asking for, while at the same time, the contributions people have made to the party, but also you do need their money and everything else to win elections. Until voters suddenly become a lot more involved and pay a lot more attention to everything going on, you need money into these parties in order to win hard races. It's just the fact of the matter. And, well, like I said, I do not envy those people who have to tread that line. I am blessed to not have to worry about that. I can tell you exactly how I feel about all these issues, even when people disagree with me. And I've heard some of you disagree with me. I talked about earlier there, last week, this week, on ghost jobs. Somebody wrote in disagreeing with me on the balloons. Apparently they thought that, yes, a person, I brought up this bill where Kim Banta was proposing a bill, or is proposing a bill, to give people a Class A misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 1 year in jail for releasing a helium-filled balloon. They said, hey, look, it's littering and everything else. I hear you. It's a lot like littering, and probably not a good thing to do as a society. And I understand, the person who wrote in said balloons don't offer any kind of added anything to our society as a whole, and I hear what you're saying there, but at the same time, we can at least draw a line and say, look, we don't need the heavy-handed government coming in and threatening people with a year in prison to stop them from releasing balloons. Seems like a bit of overkill to me. And in that vein, there's going to be some topics we talk about today that you'll probably disagree with me on, or at least I'll be giving you some takes that maybe make you think, and that's at least the hope. I hope you come here for the information. I hope you enjoy my commentary, but you don't always have to agree with me. Now, starting off, though, we see a group of students filing a lawsuit against the state of Kentucky for failing to provide a quality education. The state of Kentucky is legally mandated by both the state constitution and supporting laws, provide a high-quality education that is generally equal across the state. And these students are alleging that the state has failed to do so. And they do cite some interesting topics. Now, I agree with them on part of this, because part of what their lawsuit's citing is the absolute abysmal behavior of the schools, or results of the schools, when it comes to basic things like literacy, when it comes to basic things like knowing how to do math. They point out that less than 41% of 8th graders are proficient in reading. They bring that up in their lawsuit, saying that by definition, over half of Kentuckians are not receiving a quality education. They bring up a problem with the disparity of spending between districts. That is going on. I'll dig into a little bit more why that has become an issue. But there are things I disagree with them on in the lawsuit. For an example, one of their things they cite as a failure on part of the schools is the mental health crisis that kids are now experiencing, that higher than ever rates of suicide and attempted suicide or thoughts of suicide than ever before in history. And I disagree with them because, simply put, it is not the school's responsibility to deal with that, and that may be something that is hard for them to hear. But frankly, it is the fact that you've turned to government and you've turned to schools to solve this problem. More than ever are schools talking about mental health. More than ever are we spending more money, hiring more non-teaching staff to deal with things that are outside the mission, or what I think the mission should be of our public schools, of educating children. And instead they've added in these new roles and tasks like dealing with mental health. And that is actually part of why I believe you're getting a lower quality education overall. Because government cannot, and I said this when I was campaigning for state treasurer, but government cannot replace a family, government can't replace a community, government can't replace God. And those are things that historically we have found elsewhere outside of taxpayer-funded institutions. Things like the family, the nuclear family, things like church, community centers, those kinds of places that involve you into your community. But instead, in the absence of those types of social structures, we've turned to the government to fulfill roles that those community groups otherwise would be fulfilling, and the results have been obviously disastrous. They've been disastrous in the sense of these suicide rates. Also, by turning to the schools to handle things like this mental health, you're getting this liberal view on mental health that involves a lot of things like transing the kids, talking about sexuality, and talking a lot about freedoms. And there's been some recent books wrote, for example, Harmful Therapy, wrote by Abigail Schreier, which digs into just how this constant talking about your feelings is actually hurting students. So I disagree with them on that. But dealing with their actual talk about performance in the schools, we'll be dealing with that after this short break.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were talking about how a group of Kentucky students have filed an academic lawsuit. We talked about parts I disagree with, but I certainly do agree with them that the school's performance has been historically abysmal as far as providing a quality education to students. I'm going to quote now. This is from Peter Jefferson, a high school senior at Henry Clay. That's a part of the group of students bringing this lawsuit. He says, those capacities are not being met with this lawsuit. It's not about blame. We know there have not been adequate funding. There's not been adequate attention given to supporting teachers and counselors, but it's really about solutions and restoring the legacy of Rose and reimagining our school system so they can serve all Kentucky students in the best way possible. The complaint cites studies that show in the first decade of KERA, teacher salaries increased, gaps in spending between wealthy and poor schools decreased, and preschool programs for at-risk, low-income students and students with disabilities helped close the achievement gap compared to students more economically fortunate. So what they're speaking about here is that the gap of funding between students across the state, they're saying has created a desperate impact. Basically that these smaller school districts in more rural counties, they're spending on average about $13,000 a student, while districts like Jefferson County Public Schools and Fayette County Public Schools are spending over $20,000 a student. In Jefferson County Schools' case, they're spending $25,000 a student, double that of what some of these rural counties are producing. Now, the claim here is that's leading to them having inadequate education. Now, the problem with this claim, and these people bring this lawsuit, in this case, this student bringing it from Henry Clay High School in Lexington, saying that, a part of this group, something they maybe haven't thought through, is that, one, Jefferson County Public Schools aren't known to be particularly good at delivering results. Money doesn't equal results. If so, we would see that the worst districts out there are those in the $12,000 and $13,000 school districts. Meanwhile, the districts like Jefferson County Public Schools spending $25,000 a student would be seeing a lot better performance out of their students, but that's just not the case. In fact, the 5 worst, according to the 2023, I believe, school report card, the 5 worst schools in the state for performance was actually in Jefferson County Public Schools. So more money doesn't equal better results, but there has been historical meaning put into this spending side of things. So how do you fix that as a legislature? Because the legislature, the state, who they're suing here, prescribes the same amount of money per student for all districts. The same amount per student is being spent. But what's happened is that cities like Lexington and Louisville have increased taxes on their citizens to the point that they have more resources, monetary resources, that they are obviously wasting due to the results. So if I'm the legislature and I'm being forced to fix this problem, well, this becomes now an issue of how do I adjust and fix for this if it somehow falls to me to do it? Well, my only option would be remove funding from schools like Jefferson County Schools and Fayette County Schools and give more funding now to the rural schools per student, which would mean that the Fayette County Schools and Louisville schools have less resources. So this individual, this Peter Jefferson, is in Fayette County, is in Lexington, and here he is but advocating for a lawsuit where a potential resolution to the problem might be his school district actually gets less funding from the state, which is something they should obviously have maybe thought through, but it also plays into this Democrat call to just do across-the-board increase for teachers. They said that we need to do, you've heard Beshear talking about this, a 5%, 10%, 12%, whatever percentage increase in teacher pay. And in fact, the filers of this lawsuit say that they recognize that teachers aren't getting enough pay and somehow that's leading to their problems. However, advocating for a solution of an across-the-board, everybody gets a 10% pay raise, would actually only increase the disparity between the rural districts and the city districts. Because teachers in Lexington, for an example, are on average paid somewhere around $60,000 to $65,000 a year or so. The average within the state is right around $55,000 to $56,000 a year. But in rural areas, you see that lower. You'll see teachers making $40,000, $50,000. And so an across-the-board 10% raise would mean the average teacher in Fayette County or in Jefferson County Public Schools may see a $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 raise, while the teachers in these other districts may only see a $4,000 or $5,000 raise, which increases a difference of spending per district. You're now spending more per student because you've just increased it flat across the board. So that doesn't really solve the problem. So they're putting out this lawsuit, but they're not putting forward super great solutions. What they're probably hoping, considering that the group kind of pushing this is a little more left-wing, is that they can sue the legislature into providing more money to the schools, which, considering the fact that around 50% of our general fund is already going towards public education, considering the fact that you have Fayette County School, you have Jefferson County Public Schools spending $24,000, $25,000 a student and still not getting better results, well, that doesn't really seem like much of a viable solution just to make them pay more money. It's about what these school districts are doing with the money. Who they should be suing is the individual school districts that have prioritized make work positions and administrative positions over delivering higher quality education within the classroom. The other thing that they talk about here is they're talking about reimagining the school system. That's actually something he said. Reimagining our school system so they can serve all Kentucky students in the best way possible. Well, that sounds like the exact verbiage, the exact talking points that individuals like myself were saying when we were supporting a school choice initiative. Giving students more options in their education would be a reimagining of our education system, because clearly throwing more money at the problem isn't working. Be interesting to see how this plays out. Now, outside of that lawsuit, there are a few bills I want to talk about. First, we're going to start with House Bill 64, which undoes Beshear's executive order on conversion therapy, the main sponsor on this being Josh Calloway. Now, over the interim here, Beshear put out an executive order to direct places like the board that license counselors and other groups to go ahead and outlaw, basically, to stop allowing any kind of what they call conversion therapy. And I talked at the time that this doesn't make much sense. What they're saying they're trying to do is trying to address would-be therapists or counselors that when somebody comes in and says they're gay or they're transgender, they don't just affirm them in that identity. They don't look at them and say, maybe you weren't born gay, maybe you're having some situations that is causing and is showing itself through a symptom of which you're questioning your sexuality, or maybe you're having issues that the root cause of which is causing you to want to change your gender identity. Maybe you feel like you're in a big family, you're not being noticed, and so you're trying to do things to act out to bring attention to yourself, which I know sounds a little crazy, but when I was younger, before I had glasses, I saw kids with glasses and I thought glasses were pretty cool. And I wanted to have glasses. Now that I have glasses, clearly, those of you who can see me, see I'm wearing glasses, I don't feel so sanguine about wanting glasses. I wish I had great eyesight and I didn't need them, but it's just, of course, I have to wear corrective lenses. This is not uncommon for kids to want to act out in these ways to draw attention, but what this executive order would do is stop that from happening. Now, what's interesting, though, is when conversion therapy, you would think that would outlaw these gender change therapists and pushing the genders on them, because that's also trying to convert or affirm a person in converting their gender to a new gender. But that's not what it did at all. In fact, it actually specifically carved out his executive order to allow those types of things to continue, which is interesting that the government that Beshear has decided that, the government knows best. They're going to step in here and say, based upon at best shoddy studies, that they're going to go ahead and outlaw an individual therapist from being able to handle their patients the best way they know how. So this bill filed would go ahead and undo that executive order. To take it a step further, what I would like to have seen or see, and there may be some bills on this filed, is one, to take a good hard look at the licensing process for counselors, because you could definitely make claims. There was no carve-outs for religious beliefs within the executive order. In fact, the groups that have been pushing a law to ban conversion therapy looked at that executive order when the spokesman for him and said, look, we actually don't really like this because it has no carve-outs. It will create a court case, we believe, which will create precedent, which will actually make it harder for us to get other things passed when it comes to banning conversion therapy, because you have to have a religious carve-out. And as I said, a step further would be to say these licensing places like these counselors and everything else, they should have a requirement to honor a person's religious beliefs. They can't just trot all over them with new regulations and force them to say and do things that go against their religious beliefs. But that's not the only bill filed by Josh Calloway. He's also filed House Bill 65, where they're taking a run again. This had some legs, got some traction there last session, on displaying the 10 Commandments within school classrooms. This is something that Louisiana has done. We'll dig into this bill, and is it a good idea, is it a bad idea, kind of discussing the ins and outs of that. And also we'll be discussing raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, bill filed here by a Democrat, House Bill 67. We'll be talking about those two bills after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's AMPSTUN.com, AMPSTUN, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So we've been digging through some pieces of legislation that have been filed by various legislators in Kentucky. All this past week into next week, we'll be digging into it. We'll hopefully go through most of the bills that have been filed to date. This is a shorter session that we're in. This is a 30-day session year, so they came in for a few days at the beginning of January to commence session, get some initial things established, get some committees established, get some bills filed, and now they won't be returning till the beginning of February, where they'll start to do it. Frankfort's the only place where 30 working days can be stretched into 3-4 months, but that's the way our system works. On the even years, they get 60 days. That doesn't mean that they necessarily get more done, though, because, they just don't typically do a very good job of prepping for the session. But one of the bills that got some traction last year, and a similar law passed in Louisiana that does currently have lawsuits on, is displaying the 10 Commandments in school classrooms. And so there's been some discussion about this. Now, I know for most of you listeners, you hear this and you think it's a great idea. And there's parts of this that I agree with, some thought processes. I've heard some arguments about putting these 10 Commandments within the schools that I do agree with. For one, the 10 Commandments is not just a Christian religious document. It is used in other Judeo-Christian religions, Muslim religions. Other religions do use those same Ten Commandments, and there's some similar things in other religions, but they're not as nearly historically impactful. And that's the argument the people who support these bills make, is that the Ten Commandments is a historically important document, and that I cannot ignore. Even if you are not of a Judeo-Christian faith like myself as a Christian, even if you're not of that faith, you cannot ignore the value of these commandments. It literally created a lot of the Western values that created this civilized world, the belief of these commandments. And generally speaking, I think most of you would not disagree with them. And the fact that civilization really being built upon these ideas and the historical significance of those Ten Commandments is important and perhaps should be taught within our schools. However, my counter argument that I deal with myself is, do I really want these teachers talking to my kids about the Ten Commandments? Do I want, when people talk about bringing, the Bible being taught back into school and these other things, in a just moral society, in a society where we had that common fabric maybe of 30, 40 years ago, I would say, yeah, that makes sense that that's being taught there. We generally trust what people are saying. But in these modern times, not only do we see, one, that religion has fallen away for a lot of people, especially within the educational community, but also the interpretations that we're seeing from different Christians on this. I mean, we see churches that have crosses up that believe that the LGBTQ, they'll display rainbow flags right alongside their crosses and say, all are welcome. We are a church that believes, that is somehow a quote-unquote Christian church that believes that, being gay is okay, not just, individuals gay, but that is something to address, same as any other sin, but rather that is something we encourage. We've even seen churches have gay pastors and gay reverends and everything else, and the Bible's pretty clear on this, but yet they have interpreted that to mean their own thing. We see arguments over the Holy Trinity. We see arguments abound about many issues, basic things. We see supposedly self-professed Catholics, like our outgoing President Joe Biden, saying that they are devout Catholics, but at the same time supporting abortion that clearly is not supported with biblical principles. And so, do you really want to put the Ten Commandments in a classroom and then risk who's talking to your kids about their faith? That is one issue I've always had with bringing more faith into the classroom, is that we don't live in the same world we did 30, 40 years ago. And I don't want just anybody talking to my son about Christian beliefs, because I have no idea who you are. I have no idea the wackadoodle ideas you have about Judeo-Christian values, and do I really want to give you an excuse to have that conversation? Now, what some other people have also claimed is that if we bring the Ten Commandments into a classroom, well, then we are establishing a state religion, which once again, the historical document argument does deal with that. Also, the fact that it is a baseline document for many religions tells you that it, definitely pushes back against establishing a state religion. But at the same time, if the argument is, okay, if you put up the Ten Commandments, now you have to allow all these other religions to put up their religious artifacts up. If that is the case, well, now you're dealing with a whole nother can of worms to be concerned about. And certainly while this case is being heard in Louisiana, I would definitely like to see how that plays out before we in Kentucky necessarily go ahead and just start passing our own pieces of legislation on the issue. And you can disagree with my viewpoint. You can think it's a great idea to throw the Ten Commandments in there. How could somebody at all try to misinterpret that or drive kids away from the Judeo-Christian faiths by using the Ten Commandments as a start for that? But it can't happen. I mean, think about this, okay? Right now, if your teacher at your public schools tells your child that they don't believe in God and they think that those who do are silly and unscientific, that would lead then to a discussion you can have with them of, why are you even talking about this in the first place? Why are you breaching this subject? However, if you now put the 10 Commandments in there and say, well, your kid asked me about, put no one else before me. What does that mean? He asked me about it. You put it in the classroom. I now get to talk about it. That is a fear I have with this issue, and that's why I have some trepidation on it. Another bill we see here, House Bill 67, put forward, I believe, by Grossberg. Actually, you know what? That deals with $15 minimum wage. We're going to return to that. We're going to deal with a different bill Grossberg put forward. House Bill 60, I'm going to read it to you real quick, creates a new section of KRS Chapter 532 to provide an enhanced term of imprisonment for any defendant convicted of certain crimes when the defendant intentionally committed the offense because of a person's actual perceived race, color, ethnicity, national origin, religion, mental or physical disability, gender identity, expression, or sexual orientation. Essentially, this is a hate crime law trying to enhance punishments for crimes based upon because a person's doing it from what they call quote unquote hate. I have a huge problem with all hate crimes. One, I have a problem with people who, commit crimes, but I have a problem with this weird designation we have for hate crimes. And frankly, it deals with why does it matter? One, all crimes are done out of a place of hate, right? If someone assaults you, that's from a place of hate. If somebody's stealing from you, that's from a place of hate. That's from a lack of respect for property rights. If somebody kills somebody, that's from a place of hate and disdain for human life in general. Does it really matter what a person's motives is if the results are the same, if the crime's the same? If somebody walks up and shoots somebody, do we care? Do you really care? If somebody walks up and shoots your spouse or shoots a kid of yours, unfortunate that would be to happen. If somebody did that, do you care why they did it? You just care that they did it. Not you don't care if they did it because the person was white or black or Asian or Muslim or gay or straight or whatever it may be. You care about the fact that your loved one's no longer there. And you want the punishment to be the same based upon the crime. How can we live in a just and moral society when we start putting the exact same crimes at different, I guess you'd say, moral levels, because you're enhancing punishment, you're saying that this crime is worse than another, that you shooting a person for whatever reason, you shooting a person because you don't like them as a person versus you shooting them because they're black or white or Muslim or whatever, or gay or straight, that somehow has a different moral value to it. I would say it doesn't. You're taking the life of an individual. That's why I disagree with these kinds of laws. Every single crime should be treated the same if it is being committed as the same crime, regardless of the motivations to carry out that crime. Now, coming up after this, we'll dig into the raise the minimum wage, and also a new Democrat rep out in Northern Kentucky wants free feminine hygiene products for all girls grades 4 through 12. We'll be digging into that after this short break. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the contact tab. Or you can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back here on this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So, Democrats every year propose one. We've had a few Democrats file this, but we've got a bill here proposed once again by Grossberg to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour here in Kentucky. Currently, it's $7.25. And I think it's worth taking a moment to truly discuss, as these attempts continue, and there'll be constant push for it, why the minimum wage as a whole does more damage than good, but why also raising the minimum wage is literally a detachment from free market ideas and at the same time is contradictory in and of itself, okay? Because, follow me here, all right. So they want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. How did they arrive at that dollar figure? That's always the question we should be asking anybody proposing a raise to minimum wage. How did you arrive at $15 an hour? Why do you think that's the price point? They may say, well, cost of living has gone up since we put in the $7.25 minimum wage and everything else. But how do we arrive at $7.25? How are we arriving at $15? Why don't we make it $30 an hour? Well, you say, well, that would be too much. Okay, so you agree then, if I sit there and tell you why not $30 an hour, you'd say, well, that would be too much. Okay, so you agree that there is an amount that would be too much. So already we have an agreement that there is a minimum wage that would exceed what the market could handle. We're already agreeing that if you go raise the minimum wage too much, you'll have some sort of negative repercussion. Because if you raise it too high, everything goes up in price to a point that's unsustainable, and you just create this cycle of inflation. You've acknowledged that. So let me ask you again, why is $15 an hour now, though, the right amount? That's the first question I have for these people. And here's the second thing. And I brought this up, I believe this last week here, as I mentioned in passing about putting together this minimum wage, as I was talking about just jobs in general, the idea of free market economics and providing value. Because I was talking about Beshear supporting the unionization of raising pay and how that leads to more automation, that leads to less people having jobs, and that leads to everything being more expensive. And I think it deals with an understanding here of how our economic systems work in general. First, and this is an important distinction, you don't want to make more money. You want to buy more things. You want to make more money because you want to make $15 an hour, $20 an hour, $30 an hour, because that allows you to buy more things. But if you could make $15 an hour and buy the things you want to buy or need to buy, then you would not take issue with what you're currently being paid. And that important distinction goes into understanding how the costs of things are figured. Because if individuals are being paid more, not only are those individuals, the cost of that going up, everybody's salaries have to go up. Now nobody makes more money. If everybody makes more money, nobody makes more money. But there's also a way, without increasing pricing, that we could take a look at, that these people who say, hey, look, we want people to be able to afford to live, then you'd say, hold on a second there. Well, let's look at what is a huge suck on the system, and that is, in general, income tax, payroll taxes, both at federal and state level. And this is, if you've never employed somebody and never have had to pay a W-2 employee, this is something a lot of people don't realize. But the real cost of paying somebody $15 an hour on an employer is closer to somewhere around $20 to $21 an hour. And the real cost of society is right around about $8, $9 an hour that gets sucked away by the government. Let me explain. So when you make, for easy math here, $10 an hour, maybe your net paycheck might be $7 an hour because you take away 30% in taxes. But your employer is also paying taxes on your income. They're paying taxes and matching in a lot of ways, your federal taxes, your Social Security taxes, and as such. So when you make $10 an hour, it costs the employer $13 an hour to pay you $10 an hour, you net out $7. That is $6 an hour that is being sucked up by government regulations and taxation and other places. The government makes almost as much as you do off your own labor. And so if I was an individual that was making $10 or $15 an hour, making, what would be considered a little bit lower of a pay, I guess not lower in the sense of not an honorable amount of pay or nothing like that, but just a lower income, I would be more upset that the government is making as much as I am off my labor, personally. That's what I'd be upset about, because my employer, because take away government, taking away your paychecks. You would go from making, on my $10 an hour talk, from $7 an hour net to $13 an hour, and nobody would be out more money in that process other than the government. You would have more money in your pocket. The employer would be out the same amount of money. The cost of things would be the same. You could literally almost double your pay, and yet no inflation would take place, relatively speaking, within obviously supply and demand. You have more money, there's more demand for stuff. But you understand what I'm saying? Broad inflation across the board would not have to take place, because that suck on the system of those dollars being taken away has gone away. And it's interesting that government does this, because it creates some scarcity too as well. Anybody who's read 1984, there's a motif within the book regarding razor blades. Razor blades are really hard to come for, to like shave your face, come by. And that is because the metal that goes into those razor blades, they say, is constantly being used for this war, this endless war, that the front lines might move 5 miles one way or the other way, but the war never ends and nobody really accomplishes anything. And in the book, they discuss about how this is done in order to create a sense of scarcity and problems amongst the citizens, in order for them to turn to the government and ask for a solution to their problem. And so if they can suck away your paychecks, which makes the cost of everything go up, but at the same time, you have less money in your pocket, well, now you have to turn to the government asking for them to do more for you. So an increase to $15 an hour from $7.25, one, nobody makes $7.25 an hour anymore. Like nobody, maybe a high school student does, but nobody over the age of 18 does. The natural labor market has seen wages rise, but at the same time, the increase suck on the system would cause such inflation to goods and services that you wouldn't make any more money. And I think that's worth discussing. Finally, we have a brand new representative out of northern Kentucky. And he, right off the bat, one of his first bills he filed was a bill that would require schools to provide free feminine hygiene products for all girls ages 4 through 12. This goes into, once again, my statement I made earlier on in the show when we were talking about the lawsuits being filed against our educational system by students. And a part of the big problem we see is that we're asking our school to do more. We've already turned our school into basically being a community kitchen, right? When people aren't going to school, one of the claims and one of the things that you'll hear a lot of people talking about is the fact that, well, they need these free and reduced lunch and free lunches at school. Sometimes that's the only meals they get in a day. And instead of having a discussion about how maybe that parent should be dealt with for the fact that they can't feed their children or isn't prioritizing that when we already provide them things like food stamps and SNAP benefits and WIC programs and all kinds of other programs to feed kids where they're supposed to have food in the house. Instead of dealing with that problem, we turn to the schools and ask them to solve it. Here's another situation where something that generally should be handled by a family, ensuring that the girls in their family have feminine hygiene products. We're now turning to the school and asking them to become a tampon dispensary to fulfill another role within our system. And while it may seem small, or you may say, hey, it's fine, we provide toilet paper when they're at school. We can provide them tampons when they're at school. And I understand men don't have kind of a sort of a comparable thing, something that we have to purchase, that we have to purchase, but is like a hygiene product that isn't normally provided, like toilet paper or paper towels or water. I understand that. But we do have things that students need, such as asthma medications for kids, glasses for kids that they need in order to take part in things like gym or learning or as such. And where do we draw the line that, schools don't have to provide everything to the kids? Maybe the parent has some role here. Because as we push parents out, we're going to continue to get worse and worse effects, both with mental health and educational standards. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today. Thank you all so much for joining me. We'll see you back here later on this week. I hope you have a great rest of your day.